Drafting Archetypes is brought to you by Game Grid Lehigh. Game Grid Lehigh is an amazing place to buy and sell Magic the Gathering singles. Whether you're building a new cube or crafting your new constructed deck, Game Grid Lehigh is the place to do it. Got a draft coming up with some friends? Buy some seal product here and get it quick. So click the referral link in the description to help out the show, and don't forget to use the code DRAFTPRO10 to get 10% off on your next order at gglehigh.com.
Hi everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to talk about Undercellar Myconid in Historic Alchemy Baldur's Gate. Undercellar Myconid might be a somewhat different structure than I usually use for this podcast. I typically focus on an archetype as defined by some color of combinations, but I feel like Undercellar Myconid is kind of its own archetype in this format. And so I want to talk about the card itself and its implications and how to use that. I believe Undercellar Myconid is the best common in the set. It does not have the highest game in hand win rate, which is the usual go-to stat that I would use for such a claim. However, it does have the second highest game in hand win rate, as well as the highest opening hand win rate and the highest, second highest by 0.1 improvement when drawn. It's behind Blessed Hippogriff, which is kind of the other contender for best common. Blessed Hippogriff has a better game in hand win rate and a better game played win rate, where Myconid has a better opening hand win rate and better improvement when drawn. I believe that it's relatively clear that Blessed Hippogriff's stats are better because white is a stronger color than green, and so the support around Blessed Hippogriff is typically better, where Myconid itself is a stronger card. And I think that the improvement when drawn on Myconid, as well as the really, really stellar opening hand win rate, are kind of what's so special about Undercellar Myconid. The other good green cards are expensive creatures that are good to play after you play Myconid, specifically Owlbear, Hill Giant, Herdgorger, and Dread Linnorm. All of those are really strong cards that can be too slow if you don't have Myconid, but if you do have Myconid, they're amazing. And I think that Undercellar Myconid basically just carries green as a color all by itself. It is really, really, really strong because the green decks, since they have so many strong, more expensive cards, have a pretty easy time beating most of the other decks in the format if the game goes long. And Myconid, by ramping you, plus giving an extra blocker, plus really punishing your opponent if their solution is to use a removal spell on it, because then you're basically just up or raise the alarm on a 1-for-1 trade in the early game, which is kind of backbreaking for the normal aggro decks that have a decent number of 1 and 2 toughness creatures. It really just the game is completely different when you start with a Myconid versus when you don't, when your opponent's trying to attack you. And if they're not trying to attack you, then I think the rest of your deck is going to be really well positioned in most matchups in the format, just because you're playing green. So Myconid is basically, I think that you can't have a green deck that's just commons and good without Myconid. Whereas if you have multiple Myconids, then it's kind of hard not to have a good deck if you're green cards and Myconids. Because all of the other cards in green that are good are pretty interchangeable and Myconid's doing something unique, you should take it more highly than all the other green cards. It is currently drafted more highly than any other green card, correctly, but I think the gap should be even bigger. I think that Myconid is basically the reason to go into green. You should not take green commons unless you have Myconid or you already have a bomb or something, or they're just way better than the other cards in the pack. But Myconid is green. You really don't want to be green without Myconid. I looked at recent trophy decks that were green, and I had to look at 14 different green decks that trophied to find a single one that didn't have Myconid. They had more 2 on average. If it just gave green mana, I think that a lot of what I've said about it would still be true. But the fact that it gives mana of any color is also independently a really, really big deal, because every good common in the set is either green, Grim Bounty, or single pip, which means that you can splash basically anything. And there are a lot of like powerful single pip, instant speed go to removal spells at common, as well as just like powerful uncommons and rares that Myconid gives you access to. And this is a format where the gap in power level between the best cards and the normal cards is very, very big. So being able to splash random best cards that you see is really important. So Myconid both just like gives you what you need in your game plan in green in terms of like stabilizing you in the early game and getting you to your big stuff, while also letting you solve, potential issues with not having good removal by letting you splash for like Dragon's Fires and Humiliations. And it's even the best humiliation enabler since it gives you 2 bodies, which is really, really important for enabling your humiliation. It also works really well with splashing Steadfast Unicorn, which, again, really likes the fact that you get the extra body from the Myconid and also gives you more mana to use the Unicorn. Unicorn, I think, is one of the more important commons in the format. When I was looking at the trophy decks, most of the ones that were green and white had multiple unicorns. That makes a lot of sense. Green is... The way your game plays with these green decks is like your opponent comes out a little earlier than you. You play Myconid, that stabilizes. Then you start like casting big stuff. It's hard to like attack with the big stuff because you've probably like taken some damage. And so you have like these like big bodies that are like holding off your opponent's multiple small bodies that they likely made from like attacking early with double team or whatever. And it can be hard to turn the corner. And so sometimes you end up just kind of like, you need to sit back, they need to sit back. But if you have a Steadfast Unicorn, then after you play some of these big bodies, instead of just sitting there, you activate it, you give your team Vigilance, you attack, and now your opponent's on a really, really short clock and you don't have to expose yourself to a race. So I think even if you're like green-black, like Unicorn is a very reasonable card to splash, which is pretty unusual for a 1-mana 1/2, but it's a really important card in the format, especially in green decks. Really just everywhere though. Unicorn's really, 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 really good and important. Yeah, Myconid, essential to every green game plan, lets you splash, though that's unnecessary, and it's tricky splashing in this format. There are a lot of cards that let you splash, and there are a lot of cards that you want to splash. But most things that enable splashes are really bad. This is a format that punishes you for messing around spending mana to fix your mana rather than spending mana to impact the board. So like follow the path or whatever it's called, the thing that puts a gate into play, or like the 3 mana artifact that taps for a mana of any color and lets you spend 4 mana to like maybe put a land into play and stuff. Those cards and Prophetic Prism are cards you would really prefer not to have to play, but you can, if you're looking to splash, support Myconid with Pilgrim's Eye and Druid of the Emerald Grove, which are not so bad. So you can get some redundancy on your fixing. You want most of it to come from Myconid, but you can supplement with the good cards, Pilgrim's Eye and Druid, and then if you really need to, you can play, Prophetic Prism or something to make it work if the payoff is good enough. You prefer not to have to, but sometimes, Myconid gets you most of the way there, but not all the way there, and then it's worth rounding out with some extra fixing. You wouldn't want to do it, if you had to do it entirely the hard way, like just Prophetic Prisms and no Myconids, it usually wouldn't be worth doing. But if you get most of the way there with Myconids, then it's a lot easier for it to be worth rounding out with some of the other fixing. So you can end up playing green decks that play, some pretty ambitious mana bases in this format, and it's all kind of held together with Myconid. But again, even if you're not doing that, Myconid is still just the best green common. So as far as what this means, basically it's just if you're getting past Myconids, that's a sign that green's open. You should really try not to be green without Myconid. You should always take Myconid over like every other common if you are playing Myconid. If you have one Myconid, then you want a second Myconid over any non-Myconid common. The more you have, the more expensive stuff you can afford to play and the more aggressively you can splash. The fewer you have, the more you're looking to play more like a regular deck. The more you're looking to, just like have a good curve of creatures that starts pretty low and try to be like somewhat aggressive and stuff. The more Myconids you have, the more they kind of like answer what the format's normally about and let you do, fancier, bigger stuff. Like the very unsuccessful like Temur Dragon archetype is a fine like top end to a deck with a bunch of Myconids, but you're going to just like get run over if you don't have like an infrastructure of Myconids to do it. Specialize incidentally also helps with splashing in the format, because if you don't draw your fixing, you can just discard the splash card to a specialized thing, which is pretty nice as far as like if you're trying to splash a few cards. As far as like where I see this format in general, I basically think that there are two archetypes that are good. One is any two of the Mardu colors in a fairly aggressive configuration. And I think that like those three decks, black, red, black, white, and red, white, are all like pretty structurally similar. Like they want the same cards, they want the same game plans. They're all kind of doing the same thing. And then Myconid and Stuff is like the other archetype. It plays a little bit differently. It's looking for very different cards. And so if other people at your table have a similar philosophy, then if you're getting all the Myconids, then you're getting all of the cards that go with Myconids. And the other people at the table are like fighting for the, just like good Mardu cards, and you can use some of them that you happen to see as splashes, and then mostly just play, good green value stuff and powerful cards. If you're in a seat where it's clear that you're getting Myconids, then you're in a good seat and you should be happy to just do that thing. Strategy that's this fundamentally open-ended, like it's just, any green cards, any other cards, anything, as long as you have like a bunch of Myconids to make it work. It's hard to like go into a lot of details about it. So this is more just like PSA, really like don't sleep on Myconid, and don't like the other green cards that have good stats, I believe have those good stats only because Myconid is also in the set. And if Myconid is not in your deck, then I think that those cards are not going to do well. Hill Giant Herdgorger has like much better stats in this format than it did in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. And I think that that's because Myconid makes it playable. That's what I got. Myconid is what's up. That's my entire thesis. So let's turn it over to questions. Oh, that's actually a really good question. So this question is, what are you looking to do on turn 2 in your Myconid decks? The answer is something. And the reason I say it's a good question is that that's something that I wanted to talk about that I forgot to talk about. It's easy to find plenty of top end because there's just like a bunch of interchangeable expensive green creatures that are good. And, you can also just like play more expensive creatures of other colors, and your mana is going to work by the time you're casting them. But you do still want to do something on turn 2. You still want to prioritize 2-drops. Where in the aggressive decks, you might want like 6 or 7 2-drops. I think in your Myconid decks, it's fine to have like 5 2-drops, but you do want to make sure that you're like playing, random 2-mana creatures. And I don't think that it honestly matters all that much what they are. You want to make sure that they're in your, green or whatever your other primary color is. You don't want to be like splashing them. And like you would rather play some kind of, mediocre green creature like a Null Hunter than a 2-drop that you might not be able to cast onto. Like if you're splashing black, you'd rather have a Null Hunter than like a Prowler, even though Prowler's a much better card. But like if you're only going to play one swamp, you want to like actually be able to cast your thing onto. And then, you also, of course, want all of the, Humiliations and Dragon's Fires and stuff that you can get as additional 2-mana plays that you can play on turn 2 if your opponent plays a creature. Usually you'll play them later. But yeah, you definitely still want to prioritize 2s. You're looking to not play very many 3s that aren't premium 3s because you want to just like always play, Myconid on 3 if you can. And you don't want to be like, oh, I have too many 3s, I'm not happy to take this Myconid. You want to, kind of like leave room while you're drafting to find more of them, or to find Pilgrim's Eyes, or to find like Priest of Forgotten Lore, or whatever premium 3-drop your other color offers. But yeah, you do still want to prioritize 2s quite a bit. What is the threshold number of Myconids a deck wants before it should start taking top-end payoffs like Linnorm over another Myconid? 6 or something? Like, you really just take the Myconid. Like, for any realistic number, you're going to want to take a Myconid instead. Maybe the number is actually 4 and not 6. Like, maybe you're supposed to take, like, your second top-end thing over your 5th Myconid. But the top end is super interchangeable, especially if you have a lot of Myconids and you can just, like, play random, Air Cult and Earth Cult elementals and stuff, and just, like, whatever random 6-drops you happen to see, like some adventure creatures or uncommon dragons or whatever. Yeah, it's really just like always Myconid over top end stuff. Does green-white play different from other Myconid decks for me? Not especially. I mean, like, I think that having unicorn versus not having unicorn is significant, but I don't know that it really affects the play pattern. Like, either way, you're kind of, just like trying to stabilize and then go over the top of the opponent. And unicorn just helps you kind of like turn the corner faster. But I think that, like, fundamentally, the offerings of the support that you're getting from other colors is kind of interchangeable. Like, you're going to get some removal. You're going to get, like, some kind of 2-drop. You're going to get some, like, random good cards, like value cards of some sort. So I think, like, fundamentally it's all very similar. There might be like specific rares that like lead to a slightly different play pattern or something, but again, not really. Like, even if you have Stand Together or whatever the party sweeper is called, then it's like, okay, I have a sweeper rather than not, so I play like a deck with a sweeper. But it's still kind of just about, like, I'm gonna make this powerful play that's going to change the course of the game, and then from there I'm going to have better late game than my opponent. Nothing springs to mind as like a way that it's going to be like appreciably different fundamentally. Would you agree that you mainly want to play 2s, 3s, and over-the-top stuff, mostly skipping mid-range creatures? Especially wanted to thank you for putting this out after the open and just cooled down. Yes, I agree that you, like, given that I'm suggesting that your deck is fundamentally about playing an accelerator on 3, of course you're looking to deprioritize 4s, which I think is a really natural thing to do in this format, because I think that, like, across every color, the 4-mana creatures at common are not very good. Like, the format is really about 2-drops, and then to a lesser extent 1 and 3-drops, and then, like, there are some powerful 5 and 6-mana cards, but the 4-mana cards, I mean, apart from Hippogriff, just, like, don't do enough more than 3-mana cards, and do quite a bit less than the 5-mana cards, which I think is part of why Myconid's so good. Because, like, you're not really looking to play 4s whether you have Myconid or not. Part of the issue is that, like, it's so important to block the creatures that have double team, or not even to block them, but to threaten to block them so that they don't have good attacks. So you can't really afford to have, like, a higher curve where you might miss a drop that might give your opponent a free attack. But then, like, the 4s aren't, like, enough better than, like, the other things to, like, be like, to tempt you to be like, well, maybe it's worth having this slightly worse curve because I get, like, a really good card in exchange. So it's very, very, very easy and natural in the format to, like, not play 4s, regardless of like whether you wanted to prioritize them or not, which just means that Myconid slots in really easily, which is part of why it's so good in the format. So like, yes, structurally, you want to play, you're trying to just not fall behind, which is why you want 2s and 3s, and then have powerful stuff so that you win late games, which is why you want like 5s and 6s and 7s. Structurally, that's what you want to do, but also just the cards that exist in the format mean that you don't have to go out of your way at all to do it, because they're just like, you're just playing the good cards anyway. So, convenient. Are there alternate green decks that you can build if you don't see Myconids? So, like I said, if you end up Myconid low, you need to just like do what the format's doing. You need to just take the green cards that play like cards in other colors, which I think, you need to like find the aggressive green cards, which is like your, Null Hunters and maybe like the +3/+3 trick and maybe even Inspiring Bard to like get good Null Hunter attacks and stuff. It's not a good situation. Like, all of the best green cards are the expensive things that I think are too slow if you don't have Myconids to get you there. And then you can try to like build like a green ramp deck that doesn't have Myconids by using like the O2 Dragon ramp guy, but it's just so much worse that you end up in the space where you fall behind early, then you play a big thing, then your opponent takes advantage of the fact that the format has a bunch of good removal spells to kill the big thing that you ramped out, and then they kill you with the creatures that they were getting down while you were playing your bad ramp stuff. Whereas, like, if it's a Myconid, then you stabilize earlier and your opponent's removal doesn't line up as well. And you're not kind of just like down a card because you played this like O2 that doesn't fix your mana or do anything good. I think that like if you just have like really, really high power level because you have like some green rares or whatever, you can make it happen. But like fundamentally you're very, very handicapped compared to playing different colors if you're trying to play green cards without Myconid. I don't think there's just like you can play this other green archetype that doesn't want Myconid. Do you need to get multiple Myconids? Not if you're lucky. Like, you need to draw Myconid, but if you just always draw the one you have, you're in good shape. You certainly want to get multiple Myconids. What uncommon would I take over Myconid pack 1, pick 1? There are a lot that I would take over Myconid pack 1, pick 1 because I'm not attached to Myconid as the archetype that I'm playing. So, like, I would be fine taking just, like, a good Mardu uncommon and just not drafting green. So I think the question is, like, kind of less interesting for pack 1, pick 1, and it's more interesting for, like, pack 2, pick 1 if you're already, like, a green deck and you have one Myconid, and then, like, there's second Myconid or, like, a good uncommon. That's where it gets, like, a lot harder. I don't have a list offhand of, like, what the bombiest uncommons are, but, broadly speaking, like, I'm going to take most uncommons that have a higher game and hand win rate than Myconid, pack 1, pick 1, but there are, substantially fewer uncommons that I would take over Myconid if I'm, like, already there. All right. Relatively short, straightforward episode, but I still believe that Baldur's Gate is a pretty straightforward draft format. I think there's just not, like, that much complexity to it. So that's what I have to say about it. So thanks for listening. And I am recording at essentially the same time as this, another episode about Double Masters. I'm not sure exactly what schedule these things are going to be coming out if you are not listening live. This also might be the second one released if you're not listening live, though it was recorded first. I've been sick. I'm just getting over COVID now for the last couple weeks. So while I'd been meaning to get back into the swing of doing things regularly, there was a bit of a delay there. After this 2-episode block, I'm hoping to be getting back into a more regular schedule, starting with another episode later this week, and then getting back to one per week. So thanks for listening, and for those of you who are here live, stay tuned for Double Masters.